Hello there beautiful, how are you doing today? My name is Joesephyr and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to be looking at Final Fantasy XIV and the stuff that I've learnt with regards to controller play over the past year or two, because I'd like to think I've learned enough about controller play because I think it genuinely is better for a lot of people than people think it is, because there's this massive stigma about controller play in an MMO that would make you think, oh, but a keyboard and mouse player is just going to do better. But I actually disagree, and I think that the intuition that is present in Final Fantasy XIV's controller layouts, etc., is something well worth diving into, whether you're playing on PlayStation 4 or 5 or over on PC. And with Endwalker coming out and everything like that, I figured why not make a comprehensive guide for 2021 with regards to controller play in Final Fantasy XIV. So if that's all stuff that you're interested in, then stay tuned and keep on watching. Now before we get started, we've moved over into some in-game footage here and a little bit of a new setup as well when it comes to filming these videos. I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody that's following my Final Fantasy XIV content as well as any other content that I've been doing. It's very difficult as a YouTuber to try to break into something new when you're used to doing things a certain type of way. So for people who, or those of you who have come to kind of join me in on this journey, a massive thank you goes out to you. And no one else can I thank more than my patrons who keep me going when it comes to my channel and support me through thick and thin, and have done for the longest time now. And every time I release a new video I do actually shout out one of my patrons every single time, and today that person is going to be Deotic, who has Roxas in their title card, and I make title cards for all of my patrons to showcase in the credits of all of my videos as well as a plethora of other benefits. So if that's something that you're interested in and you'd like to support the channel further, then perhaps you'd like to consider clicking on the link in the description box below. Okay, so let's start with the basics first and foremost. So you'll first notice with the HUD and the UI that I have access to, I've basically tried to make FF14 look as little like an MMO as possible, because as I said in my last FF14 video, whenever I've looked at mouse and keyboard setups or high-end MMO players, I always worry because it looks really overwhelming. And for a console gamer at heart, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, there's a lot of stuff going on in an MMO that makes me think, oh god, I could never get into that, certainly not on a controller. But Final Fantasy XIV and what Square Enix has done to make controller play super intuitive has made it so realistically anything you could do when like tackling content with a keyboard and mouse, you could also quite happily do with a controller as well. So I've got my Red Mage set up here, and the first things that I'll go over is the simple button maps. So basically, instead of having your regular hotbars, you have the cross hotbar, which you can see at the bottom of my screen here. Now, how you have yours set up is entirely up to you, but I will go over the actual HUD and like the way in which I set mine up in case you like it and want to do something similar in just a little while. But basically, as you can see through my inputs on the right hand side of the screen here, if I were to hold L2, so I'm using a PlayStation 4 controller, which is the Razer Raiju, and now that we have a PS5, I don't typically use my PS4 controllers anymore, so obviously I have to move this over to PC. Then if you hold L2, you end up with one side of your hotbar, and R2 you end up with the other. And the 8 buttons correspond to, so say I wanted to use Vercure, then that's like holding R2 and pressing triangle. If I wanted to use one of my attacks, obviously I don't really have any targets here in Yulmore, but I can use any of my buttons. So, you know, to use Jolt, I would hold R2 and press circle. If I wanted to use displacement, which is the backflip for Red Mage, then I could hold L2, press up on the D-pad. So the left-hand side of the 8-button quadrant is your face buttons, and obviously the right-hand side of that quadrant is your face button to the left side of the D-pad. Sorry, and then the right-hand side the same applies. Now I have it here so that I have the double crossbar, which is something that you can access in the settings, and again I shall go over that in a moment. But all I need to do in that regard is I can double tap L2 in order to bring that up, and I can have access to my roll actions or anything like that. Or if I wanted to, I could press R2 and I can access certain buttons from that. Now you can even, by going into the settings, again I'll show you in a moment, access other buttons. So if I hold L2 and R2, then I get access to another hotbar. And then obviously the same thing applies where if I wanted to, I can use the face buttons or the D-pad buttons accordingly. Now I have this set up for extra buttons. The way in which I've set things up here is to allow room for any extra actions that we get in Endwalker. Now obviously we get the live letter coming this evening if we're watching this before that happens, or when Endwalker comes out, there's probably going to be new additions in terms of buttons for every job. So I've tried to accommodate extra spaces for those particular buttons. Now the other thing here as well is like to jump is simply press triangle on the or Y depending on which controller you're using, and then X brings up the map so that you've got that, or square if you're on a PlayStation controller, and then quite simply circle is your cancel, X is your confirm, but X is also auto target, so it will target the nearest thing, so whether it be NPC or enemy, etc. Now targeting is something that I will go over explicitly in a section in this video, but if you wanted to, you could also use left and right on the D-pad if you wanted to cycle through things, and if you had a party, then you can also use up and down to cycle through those as well. So that's a general gist when it comes to the actual button inputs, so and accessing your hotbars and things that you need to do. But I think the thing that I want to hammer home with this particular guide are three things and three key terms that I like to believe are the key to using a controller when playing Final Fantasy XIV. The first of which is muscle memory, then the second is practicality, and the third is comfort. Muscle memory is really important, particularly if you're looking to go into high-end content, because if you can't like know where your Vercure is off the bat and like where your Verraise is or your Lucid Dreaming, etc., etc., all of your different button presses, like instinctively, then you're going to fumble over your button presses very frequently and therefore not perform to the optimum ability. Now, I come from a fighting game background, so I try to liken like rotations and things like that in an MMO to fighting game combos. That's how I find it easier to learn. So again, rotations and things we'll cover in a little while, but that comes back into practicality. You need to be able to access buttons in a certain order. So if you were to go into doing a full rotation with Red Mage, so for example you would start with Jolt, then Ver Thunder, or if you're in an AoE you would start with Ver Aero, then Impact, then you'd need to be able to get to those buttons quickly and efficiently between one another. So setting your buttons up might take a little while to begin with, and it may take even longer for you to get used to, but by having access to that, then it makes a world of difference. And then finally, comfort. What's the point in playing on a controller if it's not more comfortable? At which point you may as well be playing with a keyboard and mouse. The entire reason that I play on a controller is comfort. So I come from, like I said, I come from a console background. I play this on my PC using a mouse and keyboard and a controller. But I also play this on my PS5 as well, so one of the videos I'm probably going to be making in the near future is playing Final Fantasy XIV specifically on a PS4 or 5, as opposed to playing a controller, because controllers work on both platforms, obviously. So, like for example, like I have changed the button mapping so that I have Sprint as my R3 because it's the nicest way to get to that. Having the double crossbar is great. You can also access other hotbars as well by tapping the right bumper to cycle between a couple of them, or if you hold the buttons then you can access like 8 different ones from just your button presses. Some of which I've set up, some of which I haven't. You don't need to take up every button press within the game's capacity in order to play optimally. You have a lot of options, and the nice thing about this game is quite how customizable it is, so you can attune everything to your own needs. Now, as you can see here, I've teleported over to my rather humble little house, and I've also made the buttons a lot bigger and central to the screen so that I can explain things a little better. But let's go and have a look at some of the menus and the things in the settings that we can change around to make things a little more intuitive. Now, obviously, I wouldn't have my buttons ordinarily right in the dead center of the screen, but I figure for demonstrative purposes, it's going to help me here. Now, pressing start is going to bring up your main menu, and this is where like everything that you'd want is going to be, but obviously you can actually tie some of this stuff to your key bindings within your hotbars. But going into the character configuration over on the system menu, you can have a look at some of the stuff that goes on here. So you have actually two modes. You have gamepad mode and mouse mode. Now if I click mouse mode, you can see it goes typical to your PC type settings. Obviously it's a little bit messy because I never use this, but gamepad mode, you can actually use the controller, crossbars, etc. in mouse mode, but because I play on multiple devices and because it just feels more intuitive, I prefer to leave it on gamepad mode for these purposes. So you'll see here there's two different types of movement settings. So if I were to leave it on legacy type and I move backwards, as you can see with the controller on the right hand side using the stick up and down, I move up and down, but I'm always sort of running forwards. So I turn to face the camera, run forwards and run back the other way. Whereas if I change it to standard type instead it's actually more sort of strafing around the character and I move backwards as opposed to moving alongside, always moving forwards. I much prefer legacy type camera purely because I think that the way in which you move backwards in this game is really slow and it doesn't really work very well. But it's there if you need it. And then obviously you have you can play around with your camera controls if you want to reverse Y or X axis with either gamepad or mouse and keyboard. You can toggle all of that stuff here. Now, filters are something that I'm going to come and talk to you about when we come to talking about targeting, but this is actually a very important menu as well. So when you come to character configuration, have a look at control settings and then filters as well as the general. Actually, to be honest with you, it's good to take a look through all of the settings in here, but I'm just going to go over some of them so that it's not too overwhelming. Now, when we come down to the hotbar settings, now the hotbar settings are extremely important here, as well as the crossbar, etc., things like that. So if I turn off cross hotbar, my buttons are gone, and we definitely don't want that. So enable cross hotbar is what enables us to have access to all of these buttons. So obviously you can see everything just there. You can have it so that you can have the pet hotbar, mount hotbar, all different things that are relative to what you're doing at the time. Now the cross hotbar controls, you can have it so you can either hold L2 or R2 or both, or double tap, etc., and hold on the second casting or second tap so that it's like that. Or you can have it as a toggle so that if you hold it and then it'll sort of toggle on, toggle off. I don't particularly like that. I much prefer hold and then being able to just press my buttons as and when I need to. So if I target things, I can just go straight into combat and I can do what I need to do with that. And I think it's significantly more intuitive to do it that way. So you have cross hotbar display type, you have D-pad and action buttons and D-pad and action buttons, or D-pad and D-pad and action buttons and action buttons. Much prefer it the way it is. I've tried playing around with the kind of both sides D-pad, both sides action buttons or face buttons, however you want to call it, and I definitely didn't get on with it. But it's the option is there, like you'll see here, is it flips it around and makes it so that it's always the D-pads on the left and then the face buttons on the right. I couldn't get on with that one though, but each to their own. Now, the W cross hotbar or double cross hotbar, this is what allows you to have the extra buttons on either side. Now, what these buttons actually are is they are indicative of another hotbar in your list. So, for example, my ones, if I hold RB or R1, then it'll bring up the different hotbars here. So what I have is I have it as hotbar 8. And now typically with the double taps, and this comes back to practicality and muscle memory again, is that I will typically use the double tap buttons as the way in which I use moves that I wouldn't use as frequently, roll actions, buffs, things like that. But if you want to actually edit these hotbars, you can't do that through these normal means. You have to go through obviously the actions and traits as if you were going to do this normally, but instead of pressing on the regular hotbars, or if you're using a mouse for example, dragging, let's say, an extra copy of Cure, not that we're going to use that, over onto this hotbar, it doesn't work, as well you can see. Whereas if I hold R1 and then press on 8, so left on the D-pad to bring up the 8th hotbar, and I then want to put this extra Cure over onto it, then I can move it over to this bar and it'll automatically appear on that. So what that basically means is whatever bar you set this to is going to mirror that bar as opposed to being a duplicate of it. So in case you're wanting to know how to change that extra hotbar, that's a way in which you do so. carrying on from that as well, when you come to the custom section of the menu, so where you have your hotbar settings, you have cross and then custom, you can, as I said earlier, make an extra hotbar where if you hold L2 and R2 together, you get another hotbar. Now again, this comes under one of your other hotbars. Now, I have it as my hotbar 2, which is a not shared hotbar, so you can have hotbars that are shared across your entire range of jobs or whatever you want. Or you can have ones that are specific to your particular class. And I typically will put, like, if I'm playing a tank, I'll put my tank stance in this menu. I'll put any additional buttons that I know I'm only going to need to use once. So, for example, an Astrologian, Nocturnal Diurnal Sect, things like that. Things I'm only ever going to really need to use once. And then if I have mounts that I particularly like to use on that particular job, because I think it's fitting to my glamours or whatever, then I'll put them on there as well. But you can actually set these to be different things. There's two different ways you can do it. You can have it so it's L2 and then R2, or you can have it so that it's R2 and then L2. I have them both set to the same thing, which is my second cross hotbar and the right hand side, because I currently don't personally feel the need to have that many extra buttons, but if you want to have those extra buttons, then the option is absolutely there for you. And then enable W cross hotbar with simultaneous L2 and R2 double tap. Again, this is where you set up where that double cross hotbar is going to be. So as you can see, when I double tap left or L2 on the D-pad on my gamepad, it comes up with my left cross hotbar from 8 and right cross hotbar on the right hand side. Now you can actually have it so you only have 4 buttons on there. If you don't feel that you need that many, then you can actually cut down on it. Perhaps you want to mix it up by using the L2 and R2 in different combinations and less use of the double tap on L2 or R2. It depends on how you feel most comfortable playing it. Now, the other thing that you can do here is you can have auto hotbar switching when drawing or sheathing weapons. So again, you can make it so that it's different depending on whether your weapon is sheathed or not. So if I press L3, I have it set to the same, but you can have it so that like you can make it so that it's different settings completely whether you have your weapon sheathed or drawn. And then you also have the ability to enable customization for certain hotbars so that you cycle between hotbars when you tap the R1 button instead. I'm using it on that bar and I shouldn't be. So if I click off there and I do that, it cycles between 2 different hotbars. Now I have this as hotbar 7 because it's one that's a bit out of the way. I'm not going to accidentally put loads of stuff on it. And this I have for more kind of general actions and things like that. So if I want to use emotes, bring up my friend list, mounts that I know I'm always going to use, teleport, return, signs and waymarks for high-end content, ready checks, countdowns, anything that's super generalized. And I have this as a shared hotbar so that I can access this no matter what job I'm playing. So the fact that you have shared hotbars as well is going to make a big difference there. So sharing, this is where you can, if you come to the sharing tab on character configuration, as you can see here, then you can select which hotbars are shared and which are not. Now the cross hotbar is separate from the regular hotbar. So this means that you can have regular hotbars on your screen even if you're not necessarily using the equipment to actually press them. For example, like using a mouse and keyboard, but you can still have them on the screen. And that's actually more useful than it sounds, and I'll come to that in a moment. But you can also tell which of your hotbars are shared by, if I hold RB, R1 down again, you can see my number 1 and 2 are they don't have a white circle or a white square around them, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they all do. So 1, 2, and 8, I keep 3 full hotbars aside for my job. So the one in which the one in which I'm holding L2 and R2 down, the one in which I'm double tapping L2 and double tapping R2, and then my typical hotbar on its own. And then by pressing R1, by having it on the customized, being able to switch between them, I have access to another one where it's completely shared across the board. Now, as I mentioned earlier, comfort is of paramount importance when it comes to using your controller, because at the end of the day, things have to be comfortable. And one thing that it's a bit of a faff to have to do is going into your character, selecting a gear set, and then going through all of your gear sets, which mine need clearing up really badly, because I've literally just finished leveling all of them to 80, so it needs changing around. But it's a faff to be able to do it that way. So one thing you can do, and this is how I tend to do this anyway, is similarly to how you hold R1 and to change to whatever buttons whatever hotbars you need at any given time, that's not very intuitive for combat, because really you don't want to have to do this every time you end up having to like use a button in your rotation. It adds extra work that you just don't need to do. So I think the importance of having the double cross hotbar and the L2 and R2, that should give you access to all of the buttons that you will need when it comes to combat. But if I hold R1 and I go over to one of my shared hotbars, which in my case here is number 6, I actually have macros held up for gear set changes depending on what job I particularly want to be playing. So say I want to play White Mage, I have my gear set 6 all held up there, and I've changed the icons using macros, and I'll leave it on the screen exactly how I've set that up so that you can copy it however you want to, so that you can have the same things I've got here. And then I could just hold L2, press triangle, oh look, I'm a White Mage, and now I'm back to where I was before, and I can just carry on as I was, but instead of being a Red Mage, I'm now a White Mage. So this continues as well, like if I wanted to switch over to my Dancer, or I wanted to switch over to my Astrologian, or anything like that, then it's just that intuitive. Now, I did mention earlier as well the fact that you can have regular crossbars on top of the cross hotbars. So if I move into my Samurai here, which is a job that I'm actively trying to learn when it comes to like rotations and things like that, I actually have the rotation for the Higanbana opening ready over here so that I can start to practice that as and when I feel that it's prudent for me to do so. So if I wanted to do that, so I mean, obviously I'm trying to explain things as I'm going, so I'm not going to have the muscle memory for it just yet, but as you can see, it's quite intuitive to have it all there so that you can follow that like an A, B, C, D, E. Obviously that's a Phoenix down when it's meant to be a potion of strength. I just don't have one on me right now. And then you just carry on down the list until you're done, and then you just cycle back to the top again. So I thought it was a really nice way to do that. But you can also use this for all sorts of reasons. Now I've seen people in like work to games videos and stuff like that where they use that to put cooldowns. So if you're not sure when your cooldowns are going to go off, you can have them enlarged on the screen in a hotbar that's separate from the rest. You can have like moves that are triggered off of RNG. So for example, if you're playing Bard and you want the song procs to be a bit more easily displayed than just relying on the hotbars themselves or the things that come off of what you get from that, like I think it would be a really good way to just make sure that you know when, for example, Army's Peon has gone off, or your cooldowns have reset thanks to Mage's Ballad, or you have access to the extra attacks from the third song. There's lots of little bits and pieces that you can do just to make things intuitive and helpful to yourself. I don't use this on the jobs that I'm most comfortable with, purely because I think that it's something I don't need on the screen. And as I said earlier, comfort is very important, and that comes with being able to see what you're doing and leaving as much space as you can available so that you have lots of room to take in all of the splendor that the game has to offer. Okay, so now I want to go into targeting and a little bit more to do with targeting, because it can be a little bit tricky to get your head around at first, but once you've gotten practice with it, it comes as second nature. So if you wanted the simplest way of doing it, just pressing X or A on your controller will target the nearest enemy or NPC or anything. So if you're just running around and you're just playing, you can literally just press A so that I can go inside my house, or if I want to target the targeting dummy, it just targets the nearest thing, which is great. However, you can actually go back into the cross hotbar setting or the filters menu in the control settings for character configuration, and enabling target cycling means that you can press your left and right to target all these different things, or like if your weapon is drawn, then you can only be targeting certain other things. So as you can see here, my targeting list is slightly different. This is actually the default setting for the most part, when my weapon is drawn, to only go through enemies, whether they're duty specific, aggroing, etc., and NPCs. Now, however, I actually only learned about how intuitive this part of it actually is. Now, not everyone wants to use this. I think it's absolutely life-saving. I've watched other videos that are similar to this one that didn't really care too much about it. But you can have customized filters. So if you look just by my HP bar there, it currently lists others, because that's the filter that I have for targeting as it is while my weapon is drawn up here. But if I want to, I can specifically target certain other things. So if I hold L1 and triangle, as you can see from my button press there, you can see just on my right hand side here where my HP bar is a little triangle button that says all on it. And that now means that targeting now cycles through everything. My pet, my party members, alliance members if they're there, anything. So if I don't necessarily want to do that, and I'm a healer main, so being able to target things very quickly is very important. For example, if I'm in an alliance raid or something like Castrum Lacus Latore, any Boja or Eureka content or anything like that, and I need to be able to resurrect or raise somebody that is not in my party, the best way for me to do that is to hold L1 and press circle, because I have now set up a custom filter here, so that I have non-party player characters, alliance members, and I have NPCs and objects here just in case, but you can turn this off, and then that way it's only going to target those things. So therefore, obviously, NPCs and objects, it's only targeting the entranceway and my letterbox and things like that. But if I'm in an alliance, this means that if I need to resurrect somebody who's downed and they're not in my party, and I need to perhaps help another team get up or get their healer up so that they can get themselves going again, I can then do that. Continuing on from that as well, if you wanted to make it so that it was a bit more easy, if you're a healer main in particular, you can go to the UI settings here, and it has an option here for party list sorting. So you can sort how you want the order of your party to look. So typically you're at the top, followed by any tanks in your party, then healers, then DPSs. But I actually have it swapped over on instruction from another video that I watched. From tank, then it has DPS and healer, because if I need to heal another healer so that they're not going to die, then it's easier to press up on the D-pad immediately so that I'm then targeting from the bottom up, and healer isn't in the middle of the pack, so it's quicker for me to get to another healer. You can actually go even harder with this, but you can go specifics with this. So if you're dancer and you have a preference for the jobs in which you want to give your dance partner to, or anything like that, or as somebody with raise, either a summoner or a red mage, you can prioritize certain jobs over others in your party list, or have them nearer the top or the bottom of the list. I would try to avoid having them in the middle, because obviously that's the most button presses that you'll need to make on a controller, whether you're pressing up or down respectively. And if you've got your tanks at the top and your healers at the bottom, those are the most important roles that you'll need to be targeting within your own party. So, with all of that combined, with that and the filters and things like that, targeting with a controller is actually a lot easier than you're first led to believe. So a few little tips and tricks and everything before I leave this video. The first thing I want to talk about is settings between multiple jobs. Now, this is obviously only going to apply to people who like to play a lot of different jobs and don't like to just main one. But as someone who has experimented with all of the jobs at this point, there's some little bits and pieces that I found very helpful. The first thing, and this definitely comes into muscle memory and practicality and comfort, those three words should definitely be the one thing you take away from this video as your priority when it comes to controller, or realistically any type of play when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, is theming your skills. So for example, I'll use two different examples here where as a healer main I enjoy both White Mage and Astrologian a great deal, and I'm very much looking forward to Sage. So you'll notice that between my jobs here, so I have my role actions, so my as soon as, my raise, well, that's not even a job one, but like swift cast, repose, shore cast, rescue, etc., all in one place, which is on my double tap L and the D-pad buttons. Now, if I switch over to my Astrologian, they're in exactly the same place. And that means that there's just that much more intuition, and it's going to be so much easier for your muscle memory if you know where your buttons are across multiple jobs. So, if I know I need to use Asuna, which isn't the most common thing in the world, but it's definitely good to have access to at all times, or lucid dreaming, more importantly, then it's good to have it always in the same place. Now, I'll go into my tanks now, so that I can show you another example of this. So of the tanks, I enjoy Warrior and Dark Knight most. Now, as I said earlier, I actually have my tank stance on my hold L and R button so that I can have access to it in the second hotbar, because realistically that's the only button that I'm ever going to need to press once, and then after that I don't really need to worry about it anymore. And that for me is the same across all of my tank jobs, as well as jobs that like to use a singular action. So Dancer, for example, using Dance Partner, Astrologian using one of its sects, things like that. It's just a nice way when it comes to comfort and muscle memory to making sure that I know where a particular kind of skill is. Now this typically extends beyond my role actions as well and things like that, just to kind of make sure everything's always in the same place. Like for example, I always have Limit Break in a double tap R2 and up on the D-pad, because it's not something I'm ever going to press by accident. Oh, you'd think anyway. And then I always have, say, my Nascent Flash, Thrill of Battle. I always have my big moves, or certainly with tanking or anything like that, always in the same place, and typically in places that are very purposeful to get to, so that I don't accidentally press the button while I'm doing something else. Because the last thing you want as a tank is to be playing like Gunbreaker and then accidentally press the Super Bolide, and when you really didn't mean to. And for this reason, you'll notice that I actually have empty spaces in some of my hotbars. So for example, when I've got where I've got them here with my warrior, I have hold R2 and up, blank, and things like that. And you'd think, well, why wouldn't you just fill that with something else? And the reason for that is because I would rather have that space blank so that I remove that margin for error in mispressing or fat fingering something that I didn't mean to press, when I could just be pressing nothing at all. And it means that I have space open for any future actions that come about, and then I can adjust my hotbars accordingly because I'll have room to open stuff up to them. And also things like having my AoE or my single target typical combo all in one place. I always know, no matter what job I'm playing, unless it's a healer that doesn't typically have a sort of single target combo, I can always be pressing hold R2, circle X square, things like that, and then if I wanted AoE, I hold R2 and press right and down on the D-pad. I know where those moves are going to be regardless of what job I'm actually playing. So if I wanted to, I can just quite simply switch my job over from that, and I can go into either White Mage. I can go back to White Mage again, and then in this case I have my attacking moves on one side, which is, again, if I wanted to, I know my single target damage move is going to be on, or on hold right trigger or R2 and press circle. But instead of like theming the moves in the same way as I do my tanks, I have all my healing moves on left trigger. So I've separated that from the damage specifically, but because obviously healers have more moves that are healing than damage moves, you have to adjust it accordingly. But theming moves can cross over in multiple different ways. So if I wanted to go back to my Astrologian again, although I need to get out of combat first and then unequip my weapon. If I wanted to go back to Astrologian again, then I can still have the same moves. Like, I know that Helios or Medica or anything like that is always going to be the same button press regardless of which job I'm playing. So it all aids in increasing muscle memory and generalization for a lot of moves between jobs that you're playing, so that you're able to just flow freely and just learn each job accordingly. Now, I did actually mention at the beginning of the video about setting my R3 button as my sprint button. Now, typically, that's not actually what this button is. Typically, it is just a zoom in on your character and you end up in first person mode. But you can actually, if you're holding L1 to play around with the camera in the zoom, there is a setting where you can actually just zoom in all the way if you really want to play in first person. Not that I imagine many people do, and you can just zoom in and out that way. So instead of that, if you wanted to, you could go to the system configuration instead, go to the gamepad settings, and go to the button configuration. And here, instead, where I've got R3 here, instead of it being that the sort of first person mode or the change camera, I've got it down here because if you look at the bottom, you can have execute macro 98 or 99. So you can actually do this for both left thumbstick and right thumbstick if you want to, but you have to make sure that you keep that one space open in your macro so that you have the ability to do that. And I literally have sprint as my macro that I've assigned to R3. I do also have it on my hotbar as well, but that's mainly so that I can see the countdown on the cooldown for it. But you can have anything here if you really wanted to. L3, you typically have like a lock-on and a camera setting. I actually do use this, but I more use it for cinematography purposes and stuff like that because it means that I can kind of play around and do fun things like making things look really cool and pretty while I'm also just like running around running around an option, like whatever object I'm fighting or anything like that. But you can change that one too, and it can be whatever you want it to be. And then the last two tips I'll leave you with before I go is, I actually mentioned this in my last video as well, but when we go back to targeting again, obviously if you want to target everything, then you can use left and right on the D-pad. But if you want to instead, you can actually just target enemies and only enemies if you hold L2 or left trigger and you press left and right bumper instead, because then you actually only target the enemy. So as you can see, I'm pressing the button, but the only thing that's being targeted is the striking dummy. And then one thing I found that's nice, this is a job specific one, but for Ninja in particular, is if you place the buttons in a triangular motion for the mudras, I find that it's actually very easy to like get to whichever like ninjutsu that you want based on which one you start with, and always going clockwise. Like, it's a weird kind of mental thing, but if I want Huton and I want to get that started, I know if I start by going hold left trigger and go triangle, circle, X, I get Suiton. If I go from circle, if I go Chi, Jin, Ten, I get Huton. And for example, like if I go back into ninjutsu or Kasatsu again, then I can go Jin, Ten, Chi, and then I get Doton. So therefore, if I go clockwise from whichever one I start at, it's a nice simple way to remember which way, or like how to get to the mudra that you want based on which button you press to start with. Like I said, if I want Huton in particular, I just go straight to circle, and then there it is. And it's a nice way to play ninja and kind of go off that way. And again, with the theming, as I said earlier, I always have my my single target combos here, and if there's branches that come off of it, as there are with certain combos such as ninja, warrior, gunbreaker, etc., then you can adjust it accordingly. One of the nice things with this game is that as long as you're taking like the general ideas and tips of things that you're seeing from these particular videos or any video like this one, you can completely customize things to your needs. Like, for example, as someone who is a content creator, you can actually have multiple HUD layouts as well. So I am somebody that wants to have minimalistic like HUDs quite often. So if I have that and then I want to go back, let's say back to my white mage, because I haven't set up my ninja to be part of this yet, then I have a very minimalistic setup here, and I can move around sort of like my controller input and get rid of that. And then that way, if I'm filming or if I'm doing something for that, then it's a really cinematic type way for the game to look, and it looks pleasant, it looks interesting, and it looks like, you know, however you want it to. And you can also copy the aspects of it into a different one so that you have access to that. And this is actually really great if you're using this on multiple devices. So for example, if I wanted to play on the PlayStation, I can have a hotbar setup that's specific to the resolution of my TV as opposed to the resolution of my monitor, but is largely the same, and it's easy enough to just swap it over. So that is everything for my 2021 controller guide for Final Fantasy XIV. If you have any questions or anything that you feel that I've missed, feel free to comment below. Or if you want to come and find me over on Twitch, then you can find me streaming FF14 amongst other Final Fantasy projects as well over on there. And I hope that this has given you some insight into how I play the game. And I think the most important thing to take away from this is that everything is very individual when it comes to FF14. So if you guys have differences, then I hope that you take all of the elements from this video in order to create your own sort of HUDs, hotbars, layouts, targeting filters, all sorts of little things like that. And I hope that something helpful has come out of this video for you. Do go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and click that bell for notification of future videos I might be making. And I shall love you and leave you there. So thank you very much for watching, my lovelies, and I shall see you next time. Take care.